Uh-oh, I gotta fix it now. There we go. Now we're back. Where's my song? There it is. There we go. What's up, everybody? Man, sorry. Could have probably done this earlier. I'm not been feeling good today. I get these things called kaleidoscope migraines or ocular migraines. But I was listening to this, and this is just way too important. We gotta hear this stuff. The Eddie Block Show. Hope everybody's doing good today. Let's see. Let me make sure that we're live now. Set the finish. Yeah, we're live. All right, we got one person watching. All right, guys. So they're on break right now, and but that's good because there's some stuff I heard earlier that I want to play right now. You know what they're doing right here is they're going after everybody that did all the fraud in COVID. They are saying that COVID fraud is equal to $500 billion. $500 billion with a B. Yes, you heard me right. And stuff shouldn't be going on. So here, these are like two of the people that I liked, and they're kind of at the very end, so it's easy for me to find. And I'll keep checking to see when they go live, and we'll go right back. But check this out. Listen to this young lady.
I just want to thank the chairman and all of the witnesses for participating. I know it's been a long day.
What's up, Mike Jones?
Keep this short. COVID improper payments continue to be an area of concern that the federal government due to lack of oversight from the Biden administration. As Representative Boebert had stated, estimates range as high as $560 billion of government COVID spending was subject to fraud, waste, and abuse. That's our hard-earned taxpayer dollars that could have been used to feed families, heat homes, and fill up the pump during the Biden-caused inflation crisis. President Biden continued to approve COVID spending with no guardrails in place to make sure that the money was going where it was intended to go. We have seen the federal government spending and distributing to illegal immigrants. These same illegal immigrants, mind you, that did not take or pass
I like the machine gun
process for legal immigrants to come here.
Lapel,
and in addition to that, they did not pay into our tax system.
Hi, Tina. How are you doing?
I would like to submit the graphic into record.
Don't you guys like that on there?
You can see that the city of Chicago is sending $71 million for financial assistance for underserved communities such as undocumented
So this
residents.
is a replay until they go live.
The state of
I'm
Washington
just showing
is
you guys
handing
some
out
stuff.
$340 million in grant payments for immigrants or illegal immigrants who are not otherwise eligible for federal
Why don't they
stimulus.
say aliens? They're illegal
And the city
aliens.
of Boston is sending $1 million in direct cash transfers to illegal immigrants who are unable to receive federal COVID benefits.
I wish they would say illegal aliens.
This rewards a dangerous process, incentivizing people to come here illegally, where some have estimated that a shocking 60% of Latin American children who cross the border, largely because they are seeking the American dream and understand some of the benefits people offer in this country, are caught by cartels, exploited for child pornography and drug trafficking. These are not cherry-picked facts and distorted figures. This is actually happening. My question is for Mr. Horwitz. If illegal immigrants are prohibited from federal public benefits, then why are they allowed to receive federal COVID dollars from programs like the American Rescue Plan?
Ziggy's over there on Twitch today.
Yeah,
I'm a pure blood.
I would have to go back and look at each program and what was how eligibility determinations were made and who was eligible. And I'm happy to follow up with you and provide information to you. We're looking at anybody who's ineligible. Frankly, we don't break it down between the categories as to why. So we're looking for people who are ineligible. We're working with our law enforcement partners on that. Whether you're here legally, not here legally, you really own the business, or you never owned a business, we're going to follow up and pursue that.
Before I yield back my time real quick, I just want to put out there that obviously being a part of Oversight, we want to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are being safeguarded, right? But also too that government funds are not being used to largely incentivize and hurt people in the process. And so just to finalize and maybe just your personal opinion, do you believe that because of this type of inappropriate spending, that it is putting people in harm's way that would potentially not be subject to this victimization?
Oh, that's right. I've been sick, so I haven't given him his medicine yet today.
I've heard testimony that these programs weren't helpful to individuals. In fact, for many of them, like the PPP program, we've heard from small businesses that for restaurants.
Okay, Bubba, I'm gonna give you your medicine right now.
For unemployment insurance, we heard testimony about how it kept people
Panda,
afloat
medicine.
during this period. So we haven't heard testimony that the programs were a waste.
These are hip, joint, health.
What we heard was they were
shoes.
There was a lack of prepared preparation to issue the benefits. It resulted in fraud, a lot of identity fraud. And what we have heard is from how it victimized.
Donnie gets one more because he's bigger. What's up,
lost the benefit of
Mike
these programs
Jones is over in Twitch now too.
wrongdoers. It harmed the person whose identity was stolen.
see.
That individual has to deal with that.
Let me make this
and
smaller.
it often harmed the individual who's intended to benefit.
bigger, I should
because
say.
they often struggle to get the benefit.
That's what she said.
Because the fraudster got there first.
Thank you.
And programs thought they were the fraudster.
Thank you. And before I leave, Chairman, would you please submit the record for the graphic for record? Thank you.
Without objection. And thank you for your questions. Just a note, they just called floor votes. We're going to get 2 more questioners in, then we'll recess and reconvene 10 minutes.
Yeah, so they're still
after
recessed
votes.
right
There are
now.
only 2 votes, and we move a lot quicker than
Right,
Pelosi
Tina?
did. So
Illegal
the
should not be
recess
getting
won't
jacked.
take long. But now the chair recognizes Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. And welcome, Mr. Dodaro, Mr. Horowitz. Welcome back.
I'll check on my phone to make sure they're not live yet.
Welcome to the committee. My questions are going to be to you,
Well,
Mr.
they-
Dodaro,
see.
and you, Mr. Horowitz.
Chairman, I intend to focus.
Oh, they are back. Oh, wait, no.
On Monday, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee,
Yeah, they are back.
led by you, Mr. Horowitz, released a fraud alert.
Well,
that
here, I
found
wanna play-
fraudsters
I wanna
used
show you
nearly
guys one guy real quick.
70,000 questionable Social Security numbers.
They're a few
to
seconds
obtain
behind. I
as
will
much
be a
as
few seconds behind.
$5.4 billion.
Let's see, I want to
Horowitz,
see.
look.
I just say ditto at some level, but.
Hold on, I
I'd
got to answer
remind-
this.
As you know, and remind Congress,
I'm just going to go
Block
live for you
was
guys.
created with tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer
Hello?
money. It was very effective. It went
Hello?
away in 2015.
Oh, I was wrong. I guess they weren't live yet. Okay. They're not live yet. Okay, good. Then we can listen to who I want to hear.
Was ill-prepared, and in fact, several times wanted the states to take the lead instead.
Oh, yeah, the Dems are
of
gonna
the
be
federal
hating life
government,
with us.
Specifically when it came to
Let me find this one that I
so
wanted to
we've heard a
find.
lot about fraud and abuse today. I want to focus on the waste.
It was after her.
It's not as sexy as
Oh,
fraud
yeah,
and
Lauren
abuse,
Bobart. We
but
got to
the
hear
amount of
Lauren
waste-
Bobart.
COVID relief funding program
Lauren went off on him.
for time and your willingness to be here and speak.
You're going to like this.
In my experience as a law enforcement professional,
My experience as a law enforcement.
says, there's always going to be some element of criminal activity afoot.
Thank you so much.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our witnesses who are here today. Appreciate your time and your willingness to be here and speak with us and answer these very important questions. Now, I'm going to get right to it. Members of Congress have been told that American taxpayers were defrauded a possible $560 billion as a result of the federal
$560
government's
billion.
negligence in carrying out these federal COVID relief funding programs. And I'm going to start with a rhetorical question here. But does anyone know of an organization in America or around the world, public or private, that has been scammed out of $560 billion? And simply, is that okay?
No.
I certainly can't think of one, and I don't think that it's okay either. So after what was the largest fleecing in American history, possibly world history, can any one of the witnesses today give me the name of one administrator, one director, a supervisor that was fired, demoted, or
Yeah,
put on leave
I'm not
because
that
they
big of a
failed to
fan of
keep hundreds of
Marjorie Taylor
billions
Greene.
of dollars from being stolen from the American taxpayers? And I'll yield very quickly to a yes or no. I'll start with you, Director Smith.
No, ma'am, that's not my focus.
Thank you.
I don't know of any, as I sit here, I could ask the fellow IGs to see if they know of any actions that have been taken from an administrative side.
Thank you.
Notice how they're not answering her.
Thank you. I didn't think so. And that's pretty insane. $560 billion we're projecting. And we have hundreds of billions of dollars, massive inflation, 70% of the money, according to the CEO of LexisNexis Risk Solutions, ended up lining the pockets of crimes sent against in countries like China, Nigeria, Russia, and not a single person in charge of distributing that money has been held accountable. So here's how badly the American taxpayer was conned. The United States federal government has reportedly been defrauded of more money in the last 2 years than the entire 2022 tax revenue of England, Italy, Mexico, Ireland, Greece, Israel, Canada, Poland, and Brazil combined. The American taxpayers have one question.
Streaming this.
How the heck were these bureaucrats so dang incompetent that they were being scammed out of $35 million every hour for nearly 2 years? Absolutely insane. And what's equally concerning is the fact that for years, Congress has known the size and scope of which the American taxpayer was defrauded, yet this committee refused to act until now that Republicans hold the gavel.
Wait till the next guy
in a
speaks.
desperate attempt to protect the Bidens.
Can you guys guess who they're going to blame?
The Democrat Party, the mainstream media, has tried to discredit this committee before our work has even begun. There should be nothing more bipartisan than ensuring American tax dollars aren't stolen. But sadly, it's taken a Republican-controlled Oversight and Accountability Committee to be willing to get to work on it. So here we are, the American people had their businesses shut down, they lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their life's work because of government mandates and shutdowns. And that same government spent trillions of dollars, lost hundreds of billions, and the result is skyrocketing inflation and interest rates for the American people. And our role is to ensure that we find out how this happened and make sure that it never happens again and hold those that stole money from the American people accountable. And Chair Horowitz, I would like to ask you, under the Biden administration, we have seen the DOJ wage a full-out attack against the American people, from accusing parents concerned about their children's education of being domestic terrorists, to raiding the homes of pro-life activists, to pressuring private companies to censor conservatives. As Republicans have continued to mention throughout this hearing, there's a clear difference between people who were issued improper payments versus fraudsters who have stolen hundreds of billions of dollars collectively from the American taxpayer with malicious intent. Now, Chair Horowitz, what is of justice doing to ensure that the federal government is targeting criminals and those who knowingly took millions of dollars from the federal government to fund criminal gangs in Russia, China, and Nigeria?
So we've worked with the department, inspectors general and the PRAC have worked with the Justice Department on these investigative matters. They've set up a fraud task force. We're a member of it with the Secret Service. We've worked closely with law enforcement partners across the federal government. It's going to take a substantial amount of time, effort, and resources because there are so many cases. We have that partnership working right now. We're going to continue to refer cases to them. And they're going to have to make assessments on which cases
I'd have to agree, Griffin.
Criminally. We're also working with them on the improper payment side with the civil lawyers as well, because, again, we want to get the money back for the taxpayers.
So do we.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
For those of you that are going to ask.
Chair recognizes Mr. Goldman.
I have chicken,
Thank you,
green
Mr. Chairman.
beans,
Thank you to our witnesses
a little
for your
bit
service
of
and
Mexican
being here
crema,
today.
and some cheese in here.
After that effort to
Very good.
blame the victim for fraud by bad actors, let's first go back to the undisputed premise that the money appropriated by Congress, including by nearly all of my Republican colleagues on the other side during the past two Congresses,
I think I said your name right.
was both life-saving and economic saving as we face the worst pandemic in our history. Now, as a prosecutor, I prosecuted rampant mortgage fraud that resulted from the subprime mortgage crisis, and we know there was significant fraud arising out of the TARP program following the 2008 financial crash. But I was shocked to learn in preparing for this hearing that many of the COVID benefits, or at least some of them, were available based on a self-certification process. Am I correct, Mr. Horowitz, that that means that individuals could receive COVID relief funds simply by certifying their eligibility without any independent review?
That's correct.
Now, would you agree, Mr. Horowitz, as also a former federal prosecutor and current IG of DOJ, that a self-certification process is a recipe for fraud?
Absolutely.
I read your opening statement closely, and I appreciate very much your call for more resources for data and analysis, which, in my experience, is the most effective way of rooting out identity theft, unquestionably the biggest cause of COVID fraud as well as most other frauds.
We could be a few minutes late, right? You guys don't need to see it live because I wanted you guys to see the next guy real quick. Let me fast forward. The next guy is awesome because they're blaming Trump right now. They're saying it's all Trump's fault, it's all Trump's fault, and then we'll go to live because they're back. Come on.
Public, I have no idea if there's any.
And into special.
Appreciate the
in my very own district.
Okay, here we go.
Appreciate the passion for investigations. We'll get to that in the next few weeks, but thank you for the questions. Chair now recognizes Mr. Fry for 5 minutes.
This guy's great.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing today. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I'm going to highlight an example of COVID fraud in my very own district. Just last year, two members of the Myrtle Beach family were sentenced in federal prison and a third to probation for their roles in a scheme to defraud the government out of more than $500,000 through a series of fake tax returns and stealing stimulus checks sent to other Americans under the CARES Act. While many people are struggling to make ends meet during the pandemic, these criminals went on a shopping spree with money stolen from the American people. You know, while I'm a member of Congress, I'm also a resident of that district. This is in my very own community. So I want to thank you, Chairman, for holding this, because this also touches home as it does for many Americans. I would imagine, Mr. Smith, that this is by no means the only place that this is happening. Can you talk about or touch on similar instances that are occurring around the country?
Oh, maybe it wasn't him that said it.
From a factual standpoint.
My Mexican rice is ready.
While we talked somewhat about
oh, no, it was this guy. I'm sorry.
National criminal organized groups, our experience in the 5,000 plus criminal investigations that we've opened is overwhelmingly, you know.
Oh, I'm way off. Sorry, guys.
You talked about your home district, Myrtle Beach, our Columbia.
Security numbers, which is an issue at the heart of what you all have discussed today and many COVID fraud schemes. This letter.
40% of pandemic unemployment assistance funds, about $400 billion in taxpayer money, went to criminal organizations and authoritarian regimes.
Here we go. It's Mr. Fallon. He makes a great speech.
Well, enter this into the record. Our last questioner before recess, Mr. Fallon from Texas.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, we're hearing a lot of testimony, and would it be fair to say that we're talking about billions of dollars in fraud? Correct. Could be tens, could be hundreds of billions of dollars. The fact of the matter is I think we're discussing the largest case of fraud in the history of the United States. And frankly, this might be the largest case of fraud in human history, as we've known about these extremes since early 2021. And it's absolutely an embarrassment to this institution, to the executive branch, to all the federal agencies involved.
The United States government has been
swindled by not only our own people, but criminals in Russia, in China, Romania, and Nigeria, to name a few. It's estimated that 40% of pandemic unemployment assistance funds, about $400 billion in taxpayer money, went to criminal organizations and authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. Just to put this into perspective, according to the World Bank, there are 194 recognized countries on Earth, and 171 of them don't even have annual GDPs that rise to that level of $560 billion. To add insult to injury, Democrats did not hold not one full committee hearing and oversight last Congress on COVID-19 fraud, which begs the question, what is this committee even for? Quite frankly, it's for a hearing just like this, when a potential amount of $500 billion has been stolen. And what did the Democrats do instead of investigating rampant COVID fraud? They used the reconciliation process to ram through $1.9 trillion of spending in the form of the American Rescue Plan Act. that continued to fund broken programs we
Thank you,
knew
Mike.
were systemically fraudulent. So I ask again, what did the Democrats do for 2 years in oversight? Instead of investigating the largest fraud in history, well, they held hearings on the dangers of flea and tick collars for pets. Whether or not the Postal Service could handle packages during the holidays.
Which they couldn't.
The developments in state cannabis laws and potential bipartisan reefer reform. They made villains out of CEOs of the critical and essential American energy sector, who are the most effective and most efficient in the world at extracting natural resources. In fact, they help guarantee our national security. So I wonder if Democrats considered if their massive spending and barring federal land leases and permits for drilling had anything to do with the 40-year high in energy prices we've seen. They held hearings on protecting the free speech of environmentalist activists and others that agree with them, while at the same time celebrating censorship of those who didn't share their views. And get this, they hosted 2 depositions, 1 roundtable, and 1 full committee hearing on the Washington Redskins, or Commanders, whatever they'll call them.
I love this guy.
And why? Because somebody had a bee in their bonnet about Daniel Snyder. We had hearings to tell us, believe it or not, that pollution is racist.
I think they can.
The weather racist.
Ziggy.
Climate change racist. COVID-19, by definition, an indiscriminate virus, was racist.
Black
Maternal
cops are
healthcare,
racist.
you guessed it, racist. And America itself, the land of opportunity and prosperity, where millions of people come to this country every year, both legally and illegally, to live their dream. Many Democrats told us for 2 years that America is systemically and irrevocably racist, that white privilege runs amok. Fortunately, the hard data proves this leftist talking point to be categorically false. And the list of useless hearings goes on and on.
And
Plain and simple, the last 2 years were an egregious dereliction of duty and a waste. So it is, Mr. Chairman, with tremendous delight and relish that I see this committee actually and actively tackling serious matters of import to our country and our citizens. Like, for instance, criminal transnational organized crime stealing $500 billion from the American Treasury and, by extension, the American taxpayers' very pockets. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I yield back.
I love Mr. Vallon.
Gentlemen, we are going to now, without objection, go into recess.
All right, let's go to the live
We'll
one because they're
reconvene
back.
10 minutes after the last vote. We only have...
Because they're back again.
It matched tens of thousands of employees with SBA loans for which they were not eligible. Do you have any updates on that analysis?
We've matched the numbers, and that's what I was mentioning to you. We are working through, for example, in my office, we do have cases that are moving forward as a result of that, but it has taken a considerable amount of time to get from the large number to the smaller number because of the absence of particularized data. The challenge has been agency data not being sufficient to immediately figure this out.
Do you have an estimated, like an ETA, as to when you might have the results?
Well, when we find a case, we start investigating it. We're working with our law enforcement partners at that point, and hopefully those cases will end up being prosecuted.
And then what actions have we taken, if any, or what actions will be taken? I guess if you could answer both.
Update what?
What has been taken against federal employees who might have applied for unemployment benefits fraudulently, and what actions would be taken?
We're going to pursue those cases to the fullest extent possible, including
Sure you will.
prosecutions, working with our law enforcement partners on it. I can give you an example. We have several on the PPP idle side. For example, a relatively higher level person at NASA agency was sentenced to a considerable number of years in prison. He worked in their financial office, who had engaged in, I can't remember
play
what
a
it was.
poker tournament while we're watching this?
But
that's disturbing.
so we're pursuing those cases.
That's good to know. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before I forget, earlier we heard from Congressman Donalds about an article from Politico that the Biden administration had rerouted billions in emergency stockpile to funds for the border. And I seek unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
What's up, Ziggy?
Burleson from Missouri, without objection.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Oh, no
The chair
worries, sir.
recognizes the gentle lady from Georgia, Miss Green.
And now I want to pet a squirrel. Microphone. Microphone.
There we go. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring up something that was brought up by one of our Democrat colleagues on this panel about Republican members of Congress taking PPP loans. I never took one as a member of Congress, but as a business owner, I did take a PPP loan in order to be able to pay my employees, and I'm so thankful I was able to do that because they would have lost their jobs, and I think it's important to recognize. But the minority side of our committee here is having a witness on the next panel that had said that she didn't, or her, or any of her affiliates, take any federal grants or contracts related to this hearing's subject matter. But in fact, as executive director of the National Employment Law Project, they took over $825,000 in PPP loans from the SBA. So that does need to be pointed out about the next panel witnesses. Here we are, a nation that our government spent over $5 trillion in COVID relief funding, and
I don't want to pay the hand anyways.
$560 billion, I believe, of that money of the Americans' hard-earned taxpayer funding. We're also a nation at $34 trillion in debt, and we're on the verge of having to handle our debt ceiling, raise it once again. And here we are looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. And gentlemen, I thank you for coming and speaking to our
Can you guys see
committee
that?
on this issue. I know it's been a long day.
You guys can
for
watch
you.
me play poker.
But I would like to ask some questions about the type of funding.
Yeah, I don't trust
been
MTG.
used with COVID relief funds, and
I really
it's pretty
don't.
shocking to me. You know, I read some examples. For example, Washington, D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser plans to use $31.5 million in American Rescue Plan funds to transition homes to green energy over the next 5 years. As many small businesses were shut down, children lost 2 years in education, child suicide rates went up, and it's hard to even imagine a child committing suicide. Many people died from COVID. Healthcare workers were fired from vaccine mandates. Many other people were fired because of vaccine mandates. And all the issues that have come out of COVID, I want to ask about how this money has been spent, because clearly there is a tremendous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse.
I got so lucky.
And a lot of our hard-earned taxpayers' dollars spent on things that don't even make sense that they've been spent on. So, Mr. Dodaro, if you don't mind answering a few of my questions, can you tell me, as our comptroller of the United States, how much COVID cash was given to abortion?
I do not know that answer.
A lot.
I don't have that answer.
Oh, okay. So I can tell you Planned Parenthood clinics received $80 billion in COVID relief loans, which is hard to understand how that happened. Mr. Dodaro, can you tell me how much money COVID cash went towards diversity, equity, and inclusion or racism issues?
Again, we have not looked at that issue. So
I'm just mad because my squirrels eat my dog, my
Well, I
bird
can tell you
feed.
the Pennsylvania Humanities Council did receive $1.4 million in relief and used it for equity and geographic diversity. I'm not sure how that helped in a pandemic time. Mr. Dodaro, can you tell me how much COVID cash went to CRT?
CRT?
Critical race theory in education. It's a racist curriculum used to teach children that somehow
Did he just say he doesn't know what CRT is?
Equal to black skin and other things in education.
Yeah. No, I do not know that, but I do know that there's provisions that the federal
doesn't know what
funds
CRT
generally
is.
are not used, are supposed to be used for curriculum.
Oh.
That's a state.
Oh,
and
Mr.
local.
Dodaro, I have to tell you, in Illinois, they received $5.1 billion at an elementary school there that used it for equity and diversity. So it's being used for these things. Mr. Dodaro, can you tell me how much money was given to Drag Queen Story Hour?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Who?
Drag queen story time, where men dress up as women and read confusing books to children.
Okay. First, I thought you said dry clean. So I'm sorry. No, I don't know the answer to either one of those two.
We need to look into this, and I urge you to do that. Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center in Pennsylvania received $16,000 for drag queen story time from COVID cash.
Wow.
I think this is an issue.
Why is
that
COVID
needs to
cash
be
giving
looked
money
into.
to
A
that?
lot of this money went to things that it should have never gone to, and I thank you so much, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Well, she's like a lawyer. You don't ask the question unless you know the answer.
Recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
I thank the chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for hanging in there.
Hope you're feeling better, Draw.
I know it's been a long day. Listen, I think it's important, a couple things to acknowledge. A lot of these folks that were involved in this, the government took them out of their jobs, told them they couldn't go to work. Federal or state government couldn't run their businesses. And so there's a lot of people that this did a lot of good things for. And we all want to acknowledge that. There was a lot that was unknown. I don't agree with taking people out of their jobs or not allowing them to run their businesses, but that's another story for another day. The other thing that I just want to make a point, it's a personal sticking point for me. I don't see unemployment insurance. I see unemployment compensation. There's nothing insurance about this. There's no actuarials. There's no risk assessment to any of this, but that's a sticking point. But it becomes an entitlement for some folks. But in the interest of unemployment compensation, what I wonder, what I find interesting, among other things, is that according to a combination of estimates, $560 billion, the federal COVID relief funding, may have either been lost to fraud or paid improperly. And while some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle condense that to a percentage of the overall and would kind of have us believe that it's acceptable because it's a small percentage of trillions of dollars, I don't know, $560 billion. I'm from a little town in Pennsylvania. That seems like a lot of money to folks like me. I imagine you feel the same way. An estimated, this is per ID me, an estimated 40%, that's nearly half of pandemic unemployment assistance funds, that's $400 billion, did not go to Americans and instead went to criminal gangs in Russia, China, and Nigeria. Now, I'm from Pennsylvania, and we've got our own particular problems there, and we can get into that, but a Nigerian crime ring named Scattered Canary was involved in submitting more than 2 million claims. 2 million claims from Nigeria. There's this other one, APT 41, and I know that you've all, it's been mentioned here before, talked about that. $20 million stolen unemployment comp.
Don't forget that. Hit that like, share, subscribe button, guys.
In mid-2020 and spanned 2,000 accounts with more than 40,000 financial transactions. What in the Sam Hill is going on in our states? Like the federal government gives the money to the states. They have an unemployment compensation system, so it's already up and running. So we're just adding some more fuel to them so that they can take care of these people that have been put out of work by their government. How are foreigners, like, do these states not see Nigeria, China, or some IP address that be associated with a foreign country and say, I wonder why foreign countries are getting unemployment compensation? Or, do they fly back to work in America every day from Nigeria, from China, or from Russia? What, can you, I don't know, can you make sense of this to like a small country boy like me?
Excuse me, sorry.
I don't think I can make sense of it, but I can tell you that it is one of the problems we've identified along the way, not just in the unemployment insurance program and others, that agencies aren't picking up the IP addresses for these applicants. Because the country was largely shut down, most of these applications came in electronically.
Here comes trouble.
That is clearly one of the red flags, and something, by the way, as we get this data, we're going to be looking at is how many IP addresses were there associated with these various programs that were IP addresses from overseas.
I mean, some of the most egregious ones, Washington State, California, New York. I come from Pennsylvania. I've got a whole list here of infractions from the state that I'm proud to represent. These unemployment compensation systems have been around for a long time. So this is kind of in the past now, or maybe it's
Should I give Donnie a treat?
They're not at the same level. What assurance can you give me or anybody else here that the states have addressed any of this so that it won't, maybe it's not happening at the same scale.
All right, guys, should I give Donald J. Trump a treat or not?
Here, it probably continues to happen. What
He's sitting
assurance
down.
can you give any of us and
I think he needs a treat, huh?
that this has been solved at this point, and why should the federal government give one more dime to any of these states that are allowing that?
Panda
Look,
Bear.
we're looking at a debt ceiling increase. They want $2.6 trillion. We just talked about $500 billion just handed out to foreign criminals. What assurance can you give us moving forward that any of this is solved right now?
I got to order more treats for these guys.
Assurance that it's solved right
Zero?
now.
Is zero the right answer?
That's why this hearing is actually important, because there are...
Because you're not doing your
other
job
reasons,
right.
But there are fixes that need to happen. GAO's been talking about this for decades, and it's a fix. The Congress has to get involved. Administration has to get involved. The states have to get involved. We have to fix the problem.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Earlier, this guy said, well, it's not just
Chair
our fault, it's also the
recognizes
people in
gentlelady
government's
from
fault.
Ohio, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to point out that
This is
my
your state, Hope.
Republican colleagues are once again demonstrating the extreme
Oh, she's a
lengths
liberal.
they will go to villainize reproductive freedom. Contrary to their allegations, Planned Parenthood health centers that received PPP loans were eligible nonprofit recipients consistent with the SBA's rules governing affiliation status and size. The Small Business Office of the Inspector General affirmed this conclusion in a September 2022 report that specifically determined Planned Parenthood health centers met PPP loan eligibility requirements. So I'd ask unanimous consent that the SBA OIG report be made part of the record. And I urge my Republican colleagues to
I had a wolf
cease
at my house
their
yesterday.
baseless, draconian attacks
Donnie wanted to
against
go
the
kill it.
reproductive freedoms of people once and for all. And finally, the last point I want to make is just because you disagree with the spending doesn't mean that it is fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive. And with that, I yield back.
Without objection, it'll be entered into the record. The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not an attorney, and I'm not trying to do any gotcha. So if y'all want to give me just
I wish they'd show who's actually asking the questions.
Assistant Director Smith, in 2021, NBC reported that between $90 and $400 billion pandemic-related unemployment, U.S. taxpayers' dollars have been stolen, and half of that was taken by foreign criminals. Is this consistent with what your investigation revealed?
Sir, I can't validate that particular news piece. Which outlet did you say it was from?
Well, NBC News. It's been widely reported in other areas, but they were the biggest dog that wagged its tail on that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not validating that.
Okay. Well, the former Assistant Director of Investigation at the Secret Service, Jeremy Sheridan, called this theft, quote, the largest fraud scheme that I've ever encountered. And I guess what I'm getting at is that it seems to me it's clear that foreign and maybe some localized organized crime syndicates and other bad actors have perpetrated crimes against the American taxpayers. Assistant Director Smith, do you agree with Mr. Sheridan, or have you?
Real quick on that, the reason why the Democrats don't want to find out who actually robbed all these people, because they were all friends of Democrats. The Democrats set up these programs mostly to help their friends. I'm pretty sure that's what was going on there.
Have you?
I know Hope hates it when I stop.
Fraud scheme.
I agree with former Assistant Director Sheridan's sentiments. The magnitude was made. The magnitude of pandemic-related fraud was what made it unique.
Do you think that, in your professional capacity or otherwise, that maybe some of these funds could be linked to terrorism organizations that these things would fund them?
Sir, I don't have any direct evidence
I haven't seen the
terrorist
Pfizer video
organizations to pandemic relief funds, but as I mentioned earlier, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that transnational criminal organized groups of various sorts
and drugs and human trafficking, all those dirt bags that kind of run together, I guess.
Yes, sir. The group I mentioned earlier, Black Axe out of Nigeria, they involved themselves in human trafficking, drug trafficking, the full gamut, so that they were also involved in pandemic-related.
All right, and thank you. Comptroller, Mr. Dodaro. Did I say that name right? I get it? Pretty close. Well, Burchett, so it gets.
Of course, Mike Jones.
Massacred together. I sent a letter in April 2020 to then Treasury Secretary Mnuchin raising concerns about economic impact payments going to ineligible foreign nationals. And I and my Republican colleagues have tried to warn our friends across the aisle that we should not go blindly throwing money at this pandemic without oversight. Fortunately, I'm afraid they didn't listen. Does the GAO have details on the amount of payments that were incorrectly provided to ineligible foreign nationals or deceased individuals during the rush to send COVID checks to all corners of the world? I'm sure this has sort of been asked earlier, but I've been in and out. So if
yeah, no, I understand. First, on deceased individuals, we looked at the work done by there's a tax inspector general.
Right.
They found $1.4 billion sent to deceased individuals in the first round or first and second round of the economic incentive.
Right.
payment.
Now, would you call that fraud or just mistakes or just people that died since that had gone on?
It's a mistake.
Okay.
It's a mistake.
Wow.
And actually, IRS interpreted it that Congress intended them to do that.
Not worth it right now.
So it wasn't until Treasury stepped in and said that that was inappropriate. And we recommended they try to get that money back. And they did receive about half of it back.
Okay. Do you agree with the assessment that several experts and some government officials at different levels, they've indicated that there was so much fraud in the COVID relief because of the lack of clear guidance? And that was done by Congress, obviously, amid the rush to give away taxpayer dollars.
That was a contributing factor, particularly at the PPP level. But I think the main things were self-certification, lack of supporting documentation.
Right.
And actually, the CARES Act prohibited the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program from using tax transcripts to compare against the loans.
Wow.
And so now Congress fixed these things later, but those things affected the unemployment insurance program too. Right. Congress gave an incentive for states to waive some of the requirements by giving them additional money to do it.
But the cow was already out of the barn, as they say. So it was
the cow, the pig, the chicken, and
the whole barnyard.
Right.
So because of that lack of clear guidance, have we learned anything? Do we have the proper things in place to stop that from happening again?
What's with you today, huh?
And I'm running out of time. If you can just give me a quick one, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, we're starting to move, but it's slow. Yeah, but much more needs to be done. Be better prepared next time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all.
You
I know
think?
y'all probably woke up this morning and thought, wow, I'm going to go before Congress. This is going to be great. And now you're still here. So.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Although I served on this committee last Congress, I'm excited to bring much needed accountability to Washington.
I got to see if I can find a better one where they show the people that are actually
My
talking.
Republican colleagues and I are committed to returning this committee to its proper role of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement in the federal government. And that commitment starts today.
Danville, that's here in California.
In the span of 1 year, Congress passed upwards of $4.6 trillion in the form of economic stimulus bills and expanded eligibility for federal relief programs like unemployment insurance. When communities across America started to recover from the pandemic, Congress continued to saturate states with millions of taxpayer dollars under the guise of COVID-19 relief without the means to distribute it efficiently or safely. A Kansas audit showed that my home state may have made hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent payments when state agency systems were overwhelmed by an unprecedented number of claimants.
Sorry, I'm trying to find a better
as last
version.
September, the Department of Justice charged 47 people with using the federal child nutrition program in Minnesota to siphon $250 million. And it's no secret that many states abuse these funds to alter school curriculum, give illegal immigrants stimulus checks, and advance green energy initiatives. Public trust in our government is at an all-time low, and we cannot expect that to change if we continue this poor stewardship of Americans' tax dollars. I think Congress can do better, and I look forward to discussing with our witnesses how to avoid this level of fraud and waste of taxpayer dollars in the future. Mr. Dodaro, And I'll ask the same question of the other two witnesses. Your institution is tasked with monitoring administrative agencies and providing recommendations for improvement. Per GAO's website and the testimony we've heard, fraud detection is a difficult task. Can GAO ascribe a monetary cost to conducting fraud detection and retroactive certification of payments? If not, can you describe the potential opportunity cost to the taxpayer of directing agency attention toward auditing massive COVID payments after they're distributed?
It's much more efficient to prevent the fraud from occurring in the first place. That's why we worked with Congress back in 2015, 2016 to pass the Fraud Reduction and Data Analytics Act, to put in place a framework that we developed for best practices on how to prevent fraud in the first place. Much more efficient, much more effective.
Mr. Horowitz?
Yes, I'd say the same thing. We talked about this earlier, about the recovery rate when the money's already gone and you have to chase it down. It's a 10, 12% rate, I think Mr. Dodaro indicated. Keep in mind, money, for example, that goes overseas, takes a long time to try and track that down if you ever can.
I don't think you ever can.
And so that's the challenge. There is no better way to eliminate or reduce fraud rates than to detect it and prevent it at the outset.
Mr. Smith, the winner of the Easiest Name Award on the panel today.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's.
I agree with my colleagues. The Secret Service, prior to the pandemic, is in the business of mitigating financial crimes and fraud. I mentioned earlier that that's in our DNA, if you will. We do advanced work because we know criminals are nonstop in their efforts in trying to defraud Americans, whether before the pandemic or not.
Let's stay with you. You worked with government entities like the Small Business Administration, the Department of Labor, ahead of the enactment of the pandemic relief funding to explore strategies to address what you describe as a, quote, a looming wave of potentially fraudulent activity. Drawing from your experience tracking fraud in federal relief programs, what could the government have done to better support states and entities in charge of dispersing funds?
A lot.
What could we have done to support the states?
Correct.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier was putting out alerts. So our cyber fraud task forces and our Global Investigative Operations Center, which is the hub of all of our task forces, submitted alerts, GIOC alerts, if you will, to 30,000 plus financial institutions and to those partners. What we were doing was sharing indicators of compromise with those entities, such as if an individual was using an IP address that was from an overseas originating point, or if a financial institution saw, if you happen to see an account being opened fairly recently and that account was being used to move a substantial amount of money in a short period of time, that will be something you would flag. So one of the things we did at the beginning of the pandemic and even prior was sharing information and indicators of compromise that we're seeing not only from other entities, but from criminals themselves, because keep in mind, as a federal law enforcement entity, we do work with criminals. We have confidential informants, and we get information from the inside, if you will, regarding what tactics are afoot.
Thank you. And the committee thanks all three of you for being here today and doing a great job answering questions. At this time, we're going to pause and change out the panels.
So they're going to put up another panel now. Another panel. Whoop, whoop. Chicken head. I wonder what the next panel is going to be about. What do you think the next panel's going to be? Oh, wait, I got to go back to poker. Ooh. Do I want to call? I could be sneaky. No, I definitely don't want to call now. I got to be careful because we're the final 20 people and the top 12 places get paid money. So I got to be careful on this. I've been doing good in my tournaments lately. Let's, while that's going on, let's see what else we can find going on here. Let's see what's going on with Tara. Uh-oh, Indico Nicole's over there. So Tara's over in France. And I got the other one playing in the background, so we will hear when something goes off over there. Is she close? Is she turning her stream off? Tara says hi. Oh, I guess that's over. I got to text her later on because
speechless.
Me and her got to talk about. Wait, let me go back to it. Maybe they're still chatting in there. Maybe I can stay in there. Nope, they're not chatting anymore. Okay. I got to talk to Tara. All right, let's see what else. Here, let's watch some live hearings with Alex Kim.
Do you not know how many times she skipped this year?
No, it'll say that she went, like, I get an email saying
so
that.
I understand what it'll say. What does it say?
What I'm saying is I get an email saying that she missed a period. Like, not the whole school day, but I get an email saying she missed a period.
So my question is, how many emails did you get?
Probably like 3.
Like 3?
I mean, 3.
Isn't this one of the judges you like, Raw?
But you said at least 6.
No, I was saying like in total, like since she didn't got in trouble, not from this school, but from another school.
There we go.
So you can't tell me how many days she's missed this year.
Marcus is kind of cute.
I'm saying like 3 from this school.
For our second panel today, I'd like to introduce
So
Ms.
you cannot
Rebecca
tell me how many days she's
the
missed
Executive
this school
Director
year.
of the National Employment Law Project.
Okay, they're back
Welcome to the
already.
committee. Please stand and raise your right hand.
Twitch
Do you swear or affirm
normally is
that
better
the
than
testimony
YouTube,
you are
to be
about
honest with you
give
guys.
Is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
I do.
Let the record reflect the witness has answered. In
She does not look happy. Look at her. She looks all mad.
Without objection, your written statement will be part of the record. You are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Comer, and Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Rebecca Dixon, Executive Director of the National Employment Law Project, a nonprofit research, policy, and capacity building organization that for more than 50 years has sought to strengthen protections and build power for workers in the U.S., including workers who are unemployed. We must never lose sight of the terrible hardship that the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic imposed on workers, families, and communities nationwide. By April 2020, 23 million U.S. workers were unemployed. Congress stepped up to pass 6 bills which created programs that literally saved lives and livelihoods and prevented what could have been a prolonged and devastating economic collapse. This robust policy response helped to make the COVID recession the shortest on record and contributed to an economic recovery that has brought the unemployment rate from a high of 14.7% in 2020 to 3.5% today.
Still not as good as
analytics. Without these programs, the economy would have succumbed to a double-dip recession.
I got to stop this for a second, guys. Okay, she just said unemployment is down to 3.4%. Now, let me explain to you how they get that. Because you guys got to know. They're saying, well, unemployment is 3.4%. They only talk about the people looking for work. So if you're on welfare, those people don't count. If you write in there, I'm not looking for work, I don't want to work, those people don't count. If you're on disability, those people don't count. Social Security people, they don't count. It's only people, their unemployment is only people searching for work. Does that make sense? That's why the number's so low. If you include everybody that's getting free money from the government, like on welfare and stuff like that, totally different number. Totally different number. Sorry I had to stop it, but you guys got to know the truth, right?
A combination of well-designed social insurance programs drove poverty to the lowest level on record in 2021, cutting the number of poor children by nearly half and keeping over 25 million people out of poverty. One important piece of the protections enacted by Congress were the pandemic unemployment insurance programs that not only contributed to the historic reductions in poverty in 2020 and 2021, but they also broadly supported recipients' financial stability and overall well-being, filling in the substantial gaps in the nation's inadequate UI system. UI is particularly effective at getting money into the hands of consumers who need it and who will spend it quickly, and this supports businesses and in their communities and stabilizes state
That's true, bro.
economies. Unfortunately, a decades-long failure to properly invest in the administration of the UI system made it an appealing target for organized crime during the pandemic. Chronically underfunded and understaffed state UI systems operating with antiquated technology were tasked with building and implementing a major new set of federal programs with little advanced preparation. This resulted in multiple points of vulnerability for criminal enterprises, which had previously stolen the identities of workers during private sector data breaches. They seized upon this pandemic as a time to use those stolen identities to fraudulently obtain UI benefits. As the temporary federal pandemic programs had to be built virtually overnight, state agencies were not able to design systems to protect against identity fraud in these programs. As detailed in my written testimony, Department of Labor has had a notable recent successes in pioneering national fraud prevention solutions and enlisting state participation.
Sorry, I'm playing poker too.
Using funds from the American Rescue Plan, DOL has made substantial investments in strengthening state systems to detect and prevent future identity fraud. DOL Tiger Teams, equity grants, and IT modernization assistance all combine a focus on improving access to UI for eligible workers with resources and expertise to combat fraudulent activity. DOL also offers a wide range of technical and system support for state fraud prevention, detection, and recovery. State participation in the Integrity Data Hub and the use of its cross-match systems have increased significantly since the pandemic, with more states using DOL's identity verification service, incarceration data exchange, and recently launched bank account verification service that enables states to thwart ID fraud by verifying that a bank account belongs to the worker claiming benefits. Moreover, states can no longer bring in contractors to help run their programs, as they were given emergency flexibility to do so during the height of the pandemic. GAO noted that a major cause of increased identity fraud was the insufficient number of state UI staff and the fact that new staff were severely undertrained. Although intended to handle a historic increase in claims, inexperienced and insufficiently trained contract staff, through no fault of their own,
This lady's way too monotone to listen to.
Increased fraudulent activity and created greater obstacles for workers who were seeking benefits.
My ADD is going.
As for the outdated IT systems used by so many state programs, Congress has provided much-needed increases in federal funding for UI administration and worker-centered technology modernization over the past 2 years. Congress must continue making these investments because sophisticated criminal enterprises will continue to seek vulnerabilities in state systems, and state agencies will need to keep pace. In conclusion, the pandemic relief that Congress enacted combined to provide critical lifeline to workers, families, and communities and the nation's economy. I hope that this committee will recognize the tremendous value of COVID relief programs and work together to find meaningful solutions.
Don't get me wrong, COVID was good. A lot of restaurants and businesses needed it, but a lot of people took advantage of it. That's the problem.
Thank you, Ms. Dixon. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since this is our first committee hearing of this Congress, I want to express my hope that this committee will, on a bipartisan basis, find ways to strengthen federal programs and serve everyday working people. I truly want to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make life better for all our constituents, including mine back home in Ohio. In that spirit, I want to share some real-life stories of people in Ohio who have benefited from some of the life-saving pandemic relief programs we are discussing today. Here is an example. Tiffany from Northeast Ohio said, and I quote, "I was laid off on March 13, 2020. Even though it took a month to begin receiving my unemployment benefits, I am so thankful for them. Without them, my family of 4 wouldn't have anything at all coming in. The extra federal money per week enabled me to pay my bills and helped me to provide for my children in such a traumatic situation." Tiffany's testimony is just one example among millions in all our districts, urban or rural, dense or sparse, rich or poor, for whom this federal assistance made all the difference.
You're going to get fat if I keep giving you treats.
Ms. Dixon, COVID-19 relief legislation such as the Bipartisan CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan save American families from disaster?
So one thing we know is that the economy is 70% consumer spending. Consumer spending drives our economy. And with 23 million workers out of work, there would have been an enormous contraction of spending, which would have then sent us into a double-dip recession. It also prevented hunger and homelessness, and really allowed families to focus on caregiving for their sick family members. And it was just really a lifeline, a critical, important way that Congress came through for working families.
Thank you very much. So it is clear to me that the Biden administration and Congress took decisive action to provide relief for the American people. The critical and much needed investments in health and economic programs are helping the country recover and bounce back from the worst pandemic in recent memory. So let us not forget that. And we are continuing to emerge.
That's a cute dog. Is that your dog, Ziggy?
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance.
Donnie, you want to go play with Ziggy's dog?
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Vermont, Miss Ballant.
And all you guys saying, Eddie, you need to give Donald J. Trump some more treats? No, because you know what? I want him to live longer. I don't want him to get fat. You know, St. Bernards don't live very long. And my doctor trained me that the less they weigh, the longer they live. So that's why he doesn't get spoiled as much as you guys want me to. Not because I'm cheap, because you guys know I buy everything for him, huh? Oh, thank you for the kiss, papas. Yes. Oh, now he's kissed my glasses. Can't read.
First of all, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. As you know, Ms. Dixon, in March and April of 2020, we experienced really an unprecedented economic shock. 22 million people lost their jobs. Millions of people suddenly found themselves without an income. And in April in 2020, when I was a leader in the Vermont Senate, we saw Vermont's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate go up to 15.6%, which was up 12% from the year before.
Like a good puppy.
So thankfully, Congress stepped in and helped us to expand the unemployment insurance. And as you said, and as others have said, it was an absolute lifeline for families and individuals. So my question is, without unemployment insurance programs, how would individuals and families be able to respond to such an economic crisis? Like, what happens without these kinds of funds to allow individuals and families to stay afloat?
It's not necessarily well known, but the unemployment insurance is the first
Can you
line
text it to
of
me,
defense
Hope?
against poverty
Because I can't
and
grab
homelessness. It is
stuff
the
out of this
only
new program.
universal cash program that we have that provides cash to working families when they lose a job. There is nothing else. And what we saw in the Great Recession when folks were exhausting their benefits is the other program that they turned to was the SNAP program. And there really was nothing else. And so it just can't be stressed enough how critical this program is to making sure that families can maintain while they search for work.
I really appreciate that distinction. And I think we can't overstress it. I know for me, having worked directly with individuals and families, thousands of Vermonters,
you shouldn't play King Jack offsuit, but I'm going to.
So when we think about unemployment insurance programs and how they assist workers in job searches, do job searches change when an individual is benefiting from
Sorry, Hope, I just can't grab them from this new program.
The benefit has many important qualities. One is that it allows workers to actually match with jobs that match their skills. So they're not trying to take the first possible thing that is offered to them, which is not good for the economy because those folks' skills are being unused. So it does give them the breathing room to find a good match that is going to be close to the salary that they were receiving before they lost their job.
And I would assume that not only would those skills go unused, but when you have a worker who is mismatched, they're much less likely to stay in that job. So exacerbating this cycle of turnover, which we know is not good for employers, it's not good for employees or families. And is that the case? Do we see that there's a connection there with job churn?
There absolutely is. And, we've heard employers loud and clear, particularly in some of the industries that were hardest hit in the pandemic, the service industry, the restaurant industry, where workers have actually left those industries entirely to go to other industries because better conditions and better pay. And so if a worker takes a job, we want them to actually be able to stay in that job, advance in that job. So it's important to them and their families, just as it's important to employers to have stability in the role that they're in.
Thank you. Just one more question.
Are you saying Hope is hangry?
From your perspective,
Thank you, Hope.
from your experience and your research,
Hey, I made the money in this poker tournament.
the work that you do in your position, why do you think we need to continue to invest in and modernize state unemployment insurance systems? Because we heard in the earlier testimony how there was a breakdown there. So would love to hear from you, from your perspective, why that is so important.
So about a decade ago, I did a report that was a deep dive on unemployment insurance administration and the impact on being able to pay benefits. And what I found then was that the average UI benefits IT system was 26 years old. That was 10 years ago. And at the time, the oldest one was 46 years old. And so it is critical for us to invest, to actually put the money in. So usually when there's a crisis like this pandemic, there's investment in unemployment, there's investment in the IT systems, there's investment in administration, but then as soon as the economy recovers, we take our foot off the gas. And we really need to keep our foot on the gas for this program. We need to actually make the changes that are needed so that these systems function correctly all the time, whether it is one family who's suffering unemployment or it is millions of people suffering unemployment.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Bush.
Thank you. St. Louis and I are here
Thank you,
in
Ziggy.
support
Now I just got to
of a
raise up.
government
I
that
got to make
ensures
more
no
chips.
one lives in poverty. During March and April of 2020, the U.S. economy lost more than 22 million jobs. Our unemployment rate jumped from 3.5% in January 2020 to a pandemic peak unemployment rate of 14.7% in April 2020. St. Louis families and families all across the country were in need of
fast for
emergency
14
assistance
hours?
during those
Holy
uncertain
jeez.
times. One such story
dealer, I got it.
shared by the National Employment Law Project comes from my constituent, Deshauna, a single mother from St. Louis. She said, "If it wasn't for unemployment, I would have been put out of my apartment. Thank God for the help. I'm still trying to get myself out of debt, but the pandemic unemployment gives me and my son a little security. I'm a single parent getting no help from the other parent, plus losing my job. So it has definitely been a blessing."
Has anybody read the
CARES
48
Act
Laws of
created
Power?
The CARES Act created a temporary unemployment insurance program called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, or the PUA. In 2020, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan into law, which extended PUA and other temporary unemployment insurance benefits. The PUA unlocked unemployment insurance benefits to workers and to families who were otherwise excluded from regular UI programs. This program was the difference between a full dinner table and an empty one for a number of families. Ms. Dixon, who benefited the most from these programs, and can you tell us why? And thank you for being here.
So the unemployment insurance program was created 80 plus years ago, and it has not been substantially modernized. And it was created on a structurally
I'm buying
racist
that book. I
foundation
want to read it.
that was aimed at white male breadwinners. And so if that's the foundation, that's who mostly benefits from unemployment insurance. And so that means women workers, folks who work part-time. It means people who work in restaurants and service jobs where their wages are low. They often are just entirely left out of the program. And most workers who are in gig jobs are also excluded from the program. So as the workforce has changed over time, many workers have been left on the sidelines. And particularly this impacts women and workers of color. And so adding this program actually invited them into the program, some for the first time in their working lives.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm doing like 3 things at once. I'm reading Twitter because there's court cases on Twitter. I'm listening to this, and I'm trying to play poker and talk to you, so that's 4.
Up to $260 million in grants to states to address
260
disparities in
million?
the service delivery and administration of state unemployment insurance systems and promote equitable access to benefits. Ms. Dixon, how have the Department of Labor's equity grants impacted local communities across our country?
One of the most critical things to understand when folks are doing this work in the states, they want to pay benefits. So they are not standing in the way. They are actually working really hard when they're understaffed and underinvested in. And one of the things that the Equity Grant Program has helped is for those folks to understand what the impacts are of the way the program is designed, so that it's not necessarily the individuals and the actions that they're taking, but it's the system and how they need to change what they do to help offset the inequities in the system. And that has been a really critical piece for states to take to heart as they are working to serve unemployed workers.
Thank you. Sadly, Republicans are so focused on cutting programs that benefit regular, everyday people that it is impossible to take their criticisms of these programs seriously. We need to ensure funds are being used properly and then expand these programs and expand them permanently. Democrats will continue to lead with bold legislation that tackles our nation's crises while advancing equity and equal opportunity. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you so much, Ms. Dixon, for your testimony. On the last panel, we discussed my time at the state legislature in Pennsylvania, where we heard intimate struggles of Americans that they faced throughout the pandemic. They often had to choose whether to pay their rent or their child care, as we know. And we also know that these conditions are unacceptable. Ms. Dixon, I understand all states approach unemployment differently. Based on your research, is there an ideal state system we could learn from here in Congress?
So rather than an ideal state system, the thing that Congress could do is create a universal baseline that is federal standards that every state has to meet. Right now, depending on the state that you happen to be unemployed in, you may receive a benefit as low as $235 a week as the maximum, or you may receive eligibility for as low as 12 weeks of payment, as opposed to 26 weeks in other states.
Mike Jones.
And so that doesn't make any sense that we would have this patchwork of programs if we really want to make sure and we're serious about coming through for unemployed workers when they need us the most. And so having a baseline of standards where there's a minimum 26 weeks that all states have to pay, where there are minimum number of a dollar amount that fits what the state's economy is, that there is a minimum set of eligibility standards that fits all workers. We need that, and we need that crucially. We also need an extended benefits program that turns on automatically and just triggers on when there's a crisis, so that workers are not waiting for congressional action, but they can rely on their programs to just spring into action.
Thank you. We talked about how some different workers or different people were benefited more from some of these programs. Could you elaborate on the disparate impact the pandemic had on communities of color that you shared in your testimony?
Yes. So our labor market is very stratified. And by stratified, I mean that women make up the largest portion of low-wage workers, and people of color also. And those jobs were actually really hit hard in this pandemic. And so those folks lost their jobs, but because of history, they also don't have wealth accumulated in savings. And so the fact that these programs that Congress took action so quickly and was able to get the money out the door, it meant a lot to folks who did not have savings to rely on and for whom this program made the difference between being able to pay rent and stay in their homes.
Thank you. Lastly, where would we have been without these programs? In other words, what would have happened to the millions of individuals who relied on these programs during the pandemic without them?
We would have had incredible child poverty and a tsunami of evictions and many other ills that we were able to avoid. And that was really great for children, for families and communities. And Congress really came through for working people in this program. And it is something that we will feel the positive effects of for generations. When families are in poverty, it's very hard on children. It's hard on the mental health of parents if they don't have income. And so there is a payoff beyond just the actual monetary amount that happens in families that we will be reaping the benefits of for generations to come.
Thank you for your testimony and for your answers. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Goldman from New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Dixon.
Sounds like a liberal coming up.
Being here with us today. I'm from New York. New York State experienced its first COVID-19 case on March 1st, 2020, and I actually got COVID myself on March 10th, very early on. New York was at the epicenter of the pandemic at the beginning, and more than 78,000 New Yorkers have died as a result of COVID. As families in New York endured record unemployment throughout the pandemic, the unemployment insurance system became a lifeline to nearly 5 million New Yorkers. In my district, organizations like the Chinese American Planning Council connected at least 740 households with unemployment insurance, nearly 2,000 families with housing assistance, and more than 1,300 people who were excluded from federal relief programs got aid through New York City's innovative Immigrant Emergency Relief Program. And that's just one outstanding organization of many. When COVID surged and 22 million people lost their job, it fell to our unemployment insurance system to take on the immense volume of new claims. New York's Department of Labor distributed more than $105 billion, which is the equivalent of 50 years' worth of benefits in the 2 years from the start of the pandemic. But obviously, this new influx of benefits opened itself up to fraud, especially through identity theft online, which I know you have spoken about.
I need some
The
cards.
New York State Department of Labor has recommended that Congress provide sustained investments and additional resources to help states combat the ever-evolving threat of cyber fraud. And Ms. Dixon, I'm curious if what you think Congress should do to assist states, separate from the sort of federal baseline that you talked about. Where would our resources be most effective in assisting states to modernize and upgrade its unemployment insurance systems?
I'm echoing folks from the first panel. The information technology investments are critical. We have a decentralized system. There are 53 different unemployment insurance programs, and so there are 53 opportunities for criminal fraud rings to attack the system.
Why is there so many programs?
So really being able to invest in those systems, to harden those systems, to make sure that those offices are staffed. And one other really critical thing that Congress could do is create a program like the Extended Benefit Program that actually can be pre-programmed and already have the fraud measures built into it so that when there's a crisis, it just triggers on. And states are ready, and they're not rushing to program a different program each time that there's a crisis.
Thank you. One of the most, I think, productive and effective measures that Congress passed was the child tax credit. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the success of the child tax credit and why it was so successful at reducing child poverty.
So one piece of it was that money actually went into families' bank accounts, and they did not have to wait until they filed their taxes to get this money. And so when you add that money together with the unemployment insurance payments, you have families actually getting cash to meet their needs at a critical time. And we see that in the reduction of poverty, like what the huge impact that was to families and children all over the United States.
And you're drawing a distinction
Piggy,
between
I think you're right.
Earned income tax credit, which comes when you're paying your taxes as opposed to
You're blaming stink bugs?
cash in direct deposited or sent to you by check, in that moment. Is that what you're saying?
No, so the child tax credit is also generally not paid on a monthly basis the way it was in this instance. So it generally is something that either folks are changing their tax withholding to account for, or they're waiting until they file
My
their
neck
taxes
really
to
hurts
get it.
bad.
So what was
I think
really
it's all this looking at the
revolutionary
screen.
was actually giving the cash, putting the cash in families' bank accounts.
Can't wait till my new studio's ready.
In my final seconds, can you talk especially about how important that child tax credit was to underserved communities and people of color in particular?
Well, we know that those families are the ones who are hit the hardest in this pandemic, but they're also sort of chronically hit the hardest because they're in the lowest paying jobs. And so to make sure that children actually have their needs met, this was critical. And it was critical. It would have been critical at any time.
I'm in last place.
But it was
I gotta go all
especially
in
critical
here.
during this pandemic. And it would be great if
Now or
Congress
never.
could figure out how to reinstate it, because the impact was just phenomenal for families.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Uh-oh, it's AOC. Hold on.
It's difficult to remember, given all that has happened in the last 3 years, but I'd like us to envision ourselves back in those first few months of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. In March and April of 2020 alone, the economy lost more than 22 million jobs, and the unemployment rate skyrocketed to 14.7%. Jobs in sectors that are absolutely essential to the American economy were threatened. But after the CARES Act, states were able to put in place expanded unemployment insurance programs to assist workers who had lost their jobs. And census data shows that these expanded benefits kept approximately 5.5 million people out of poverty in 2020. Ms. Dixon, I'm curious about, from your vantage point, how expanded unemployment insurance played out as such a vital lifeline for workers as well as states during the pandemic.
So one of the reasons that Congress put in place these programs is because the unemployment insurance program in the states is inadequate. Inadequate in who it covers, inadequate in how much the weekly benefit amount is. And so when Congress added $600 a week and then $300, that was amazing, especially in states where the average benefit is only, the national average benefit is only $300 a week.
Oh, here comes trouble.
And so this made it possible for folks to stay in their homes. They didn't have to choose between food and gas in their cars. It was critical. And
I gotta go all in here.
And I think that, like, part of what we have to do is learn from the successes. So we've talked a lot about instances where there was identity theft and fraud, but we haven't talked about the amazing number of folks who got UI for the first time and what it meant for them and their ability to stay attached to the workforce. And so I think we really have to mine the data on the good pieces and figure out what we can carry forward and what Congress can do to actually carry those pieces forward as a minimum standard for states to implement.
Absolutely. Thank you for that information, because you know, for so much in this hearing, there's a constant focus, not just on the notion of the pandemic response being fraudulent or wasteful, but it seems as though a particular fixation on the unemployment.
I made $41 in this tournament.
Which, as you stated,
what's up, Ultimate?
If it weren't for the federal unemployment,
I paid $25 plus still $27, and I made 41
have been potentially
for half an hour. Not bad, or an hour.
Months of unemployment. And
Let's
having
do another
to
one.
just scrounge by on as little as $300 a week. And especially when it comes to skyrocketing costs of housing, would it be also in your assessment that this could have also potentially, without that federal response, dramatically expanded the amount of housing insecurity and people who may even be struggling with homelessness if it weren't for that supplemental?
Here's another $10 tournament. I'll
Absolutely
play
did. Because even though there were also things that Congress created that were housing supplements and assistance, it did take a while to get out. And the UI program is the quickest way to get money into the pockets of workers. And so this really did have a critical influence on being able to stay in homes and for folks to be able to pay their rent and to not, and you know, there was an eviction moratorium, but it also means that they're not sitting there with $10,000 of back rent that they can never pay. So it just kept them, you know, it kept them going in a way that made sure that they weren't incurring debt to actually try to just do their basic living expenses.
Absolutely. And you know, despite experiencing the worst job losses, the United States experiencing the worst job losses since the Great Depression during that early COVID period, The COVID-19 recession was also the shortest on record. But to expand on this point that you're making, how did these pandemic relief programs, particularly unemployment insurance, help stabilize the economy, even from a more macro perspective?
So because so much of our economy is based on consumer spending, that's the first thing that families cut back on. And so we know it's kind of like it's an unvirtuous cycle. So there's an economic downturn, there's a contraction, and it just gets worse and worse. And so the UI program actually did what it was designed to do, which was to stabilize the economy, to stabilize communities and state economies, and to prevent that downward spiral, and to prevent a double dip recession, which we had some experience with a pretty terrible recession not that long ago. And so just being able to get through this pandemic without that protracted recession and also without that protracted high unemployment rate.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I yield back to the chair.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dixon, welcome. I've got a question that's triggered by something that you said, which is, well, why did our unemployment insurance system grow up in such a way that it's decentralized in the 50 states rather than being one national program? Because it seems like the problems are just legion with doing it that way.
Played that hand awful.
So the reason is because the Southern planter class in the 1930s would not have approved a program of that nature. There were actually proposals to make it a universal program, to make it paid for out of general fund dollars, and those were not adopted because the Southern states did not want people of color, black people,
I totally agree, Nana
to
Jill.
have access to this program. They wanted the control to be able to decide who qualifies and who does not.
I mean, to my mind, it's almost like having 50 different Social Security programs or 50 different Medicare programs, right? We've just been through a period where we've seen the brokenness of a system that is that decentralized. So, well, thank you for clarifying that for me.
It's mostly your fault, Mr.
The
Raskin.
bottom line here is
Democrats.
that expanded unemployment insurance, even with these dysfunctional, antiquated state systems, allowed millions of people to fill in financial gaps in their lives at a time of unprecedented difficulty and loss. Would you share a few examples with us of how expanded unemployment insurance benefited the people that you work with?
So though we don't directly represent workers, I do get emails from workers who don't know that, and often I can refer them to legal representation. But it is very, very satisfying when the email that you get from a worker is about how grateful they are that this program is in place, that this program got extended, and that they are able to focus on their family and their livelihood. And so getting those kinds of emails from workers, it really does fill my soul and makes me want to show up every day to do this job.
Aww.
And so workers were really organizing around these benefits. They were active, they were engaged, and it's been critical and phenomenal that they had these benefits to cover their basic needs in this, once in a century crisis.
Gotcha. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us before you go?
Don't take your foot off the gas.
All right, Mike.
Supporting UI administrative funding and providing support for upgrading IT systems and all of the things.
Yeah, Raskin is a piece of junk.
On behalf of working people,
Let's
really
go, Brandon.
grateful for the way
Let's
that
go, Brandon. I agree.
And just hope that
That's what
you
I
all,
say.
with what you've heard today from me and from the other panel, will take seriously the need to invest in the infrastructure of this program so that it can function well without Congress having to step in when there's a crisis or just when there's a personal crisis for a family.
Well, thank you for your wonderful testimony and for your commitment to the cause. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Before we adjourn this hearing, I would like to introduce our 5 subcommittee chairs on behalf of Chairman Comer. Congresswoman Nancy Mace will chair the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation. Congressman Pat Fallon will chair the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs. Congressman Sessions will chair the Subcommittee on Government Operations and the Federal Workforce. Congresswoman Lisa McClain will chair the Subcommittee on Healthcare and Financial Services.
I'm going to be down in your way, Debbie Ann, in 2 weeks on the 14th.
The border.
My buddy is giving me one of his badges for the Tulare Ag Show so I can go film it.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Connolly will be our ranking member on the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, IT, and Government Innovation. Ms. Bush will be our ranking member on Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs. Mr. Mfume will be the ranking member on Government Operations and the Workforce. Mr. Krishnamurthy will be the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Healthcare and Financial Services, and Ms. Porter will be ranking member on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution naming the 5 subcommittee chairs and the 5 ranking members is approved. In closing, I want to thank our panelists once again for their important and insightful testimony today. I also want to thank my colleagues for participating in our first oversight hearing of the 118th Congress, an oversight hearing that goes to the very heart of this committee's jurisdiction, protecting taxpayer dollars from fraud, waste, and abuse. With that, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. With that, our hearing is adjourned.
And that's it, folks. Yeah, Raskin is definitely a huge POS, isn't he? All right, then, guys. I'm going to get the heck out of here. I got some work. I'm feeling a little bit better, so I got some work to do. I got to get ready for tonight's show. I got to go get the mail from my stepdad. And I don't know what happened to Jim Jordan's committee. I haven't seen it yet today. So once I get my studio, do you guys want more of these? I know there's not a lot of people watching it, but maybe we'll get more people watching it if I start doing more. Yeah, sorry, Debbie. It's over. I can't control what their stuff goes on. Ooh, I gotta raise this pot pretty good. Okay, okie dokie pokies. I don't want to do something else going on. Anyways, everybody, that's the way you want it. Oh man, I got shitty cards. All right, guys. Well, you guys have a good day. I'm gonna go. I got stuff to do, but I will be back later on tonight with our normal new show. See you then. Good day, everybody. Hold on. What don't I have a good day on here?
I said good day.
There you go.